those families and the loss that they've had for the firefighters that they had injured. I've also spent a large amount of time because when EPA's...
Just a reminder, you can continue to watch this live online at cspan.org. The House is gaveling in next. We'll take you there live here on C-SPAN.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. God of the universe, we give you thanks for giving us another day. We ask your blessing upon those who have worked so hard these past few days. Many issues remain and their solutions continue to elude. Not all are completely satisfied, but help us all to proceed graciously, remaining vigilant for those values held most dear while being just. In the days that come, help each member to understand well and interpret positively as they are able the positions of those with whom they disagree. Grant to each the wisdom of Solomon, and to us all the faith and confidence to know that no matter how difficult things appear to be, you continue to walk with our nation as you have done for over 2 centuries. May all that is done today in the people's house be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the Journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the Journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Maloney. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise? Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, we're now in the 4th week of the civilian furloughs at the Department of Defense that are wreaking havoc on our national security and the lives of patriotic men and women across this country. And, Mr. Speaker, I've said repeatedly the decisions that led us here were not the result of strategic analysis, but yet another consequence of misguided cuts to our national defense. Just a few moments ago, we were in a hearing in the Armed Services Committee, and a high-ranking member of the Department of the Pentagon said that the suggestion that we now know the President made for sequestration was a dumb idea. It was certainly a wrong idea. It was wrong when the President signed it into law, but what's worse is the current position of the White House, that even if the House and the Senate can reach an agreement to fix sequestration and stop these furloughs, that they will not agree to it unless we give the President all the spending he wants in every area of government and increase in taxes in all the areas of government he wants. Mr. Speaker, this is wrong. We need to address sequestration now for national defense and stop it before it's too late. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, last week I met with Rich Lowry, the editor of National Review, whose new book, Lincoln Unbound, urges the Republican Party to embrace an aspirational agenda of Abraham Lincoln, who led an ambitious program of rail and canal construction. His book calls to mind the words of Sheila Bair, a George W. Bush administration official, who in February urged her fellow Republicans to remember that from Lincoln's Transcontinental Railroad to Eisenhower's highway system, Republicans have understood that investing in critical infrastructure projects creates jobs and expands the economy. And yet the appropriations bill that was on the floor this week would have cut $2 billion from the Department of Transportation. It was a total rejection of the Lincoln-Eisenhower tradition. We have spent $87 billion rebuilding the infrastructure of Afghanistan and just approved $5 billion more. And according to the United States Inspector General, supporters of the Taliban and al-Qaeda are getting the contracts, and far too much will be wasted due to insufficient oversight. This, Mr. Speaker, is appalling, and it's time to do nation building right here at home.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 1 minute.
According to the most recent released numbers by the Congressional Budget Office, Obamacare is now going to cost the American taxpayers nearly $1.4 trillion. Now, with our national debt sitting at $16.8 trillion and rising every single day, I must ask my colleagues who support this, can America really afford this? Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman from Oklahoma yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the dangers of a nuclear Iran are real and represent one of the greatest threats to our country and to our allies. In addition to the existential threat to our ally Israel, Iran is a growing source of violence in the Middle East, propping up the Syrian regime, arming Hezbollah, and undermining a fragile peace in Iraq. More troubling, the Iranian regime is pursuing an active nuclear capability, which we cannot allow. While we have strong laws on the books already, we can and must go even further to isolate the Iranian regime and the major sources of funding that support it. The Nuclear Iran Prevention Act will cripple that country's energy sector and tighten sanctions on Iran's radical leadership and human rights violators. And for the first time, the bill authorizes the President to impose sanctions on any entity that maintains significant commercial ties with Iran. Without question, we must come together to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, and I urge my colleagues in the Senate to join us in sending a clear message to the Iranians that we will stand firmly with our friend Israel until the Iran regime forsakes this reckless course and rejoins the peaceful community of nations. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I've been asking a series of questions over the last 3 weeks about what happened in Benghazi last September. After a year of investigation, none of the questions have been answered publicly, not one. Tomorrow is the last day before Congress departs for its August recess, and I plan to resubmit all the questions I have asked so they are listed in the congressional record for history to see, and history will determine whether the American people ever learn the truth. Yesterday, I focused my questions on the other U.S. facility that was attacked that night, the CIA annex. Today, I only have one question. Who in the White House knew what was going on in the annex? That's it, one question. Who knew? The Chief of Staff, then Deputy National Security Advisor and current CIA Director John Brennan? Something is just not right. It is time to honor both those who were killed and the survivors by creating a House Select Committee, and in the words of the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, let Benghazi chips fall.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
A year ago, the Sikhs at the Oak Creek, Wisconsin temple, or Gurdwara, were peacefully preparing meals for Sunday worship. But that peace was shattered when a 40-year-old neo-Nazi man walked in and began shooting anyone in his path. I stand here today to honor the 6 victims of this senseless massacre: Savik Singh Katra, Satwat Singh Kulika, Ranjit Singh, Sita Singh, Badamjit Kaur, Prakash Singh. You will never be forgotten. American Sikhs have been the targets of discrimination and violence. Just this week, the word terrorists was scrawled against the wall of a Gurdwara in Riverside. In the memory of Oak Creek, we will recommit to fighting against intolerance wherever and whenever it occurs, so that the lives of those 6 brave souls will not be lost in vain.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Cantor, seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House and to revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the measures we're bringing to the floor this week aimed at stopping government abuse. With millions of working middle-class Americans struggling, House Republicans have chosen to lead on the issues that matter to them. We focused on creating jobs, lowering energy prices, offering children a better education, and lessening the burden of regulations and red tape on their lives. And this week, we are holding government accountable to them by increasing transparency, cutting waste, and giving them new protections from an out-of-control bureaucracy. Our plan is to stop the reckless waste of taxpayer dollars with new controls for federal agency spending, and to give new powers to our citizens so that government bureaucrats can be held accountable for any political intimidation or poor customer service that may occur. These reforms are reforms that our country needs, because many in Washington simply have forgotten the most important principle, that the federal government works for the people and not the other way around. I'm surprised that the Democratic leaders have urged opposition to several of these common-sense measures. Why do they want to forbid citizens from transparently recording conversations with federal regulators? You have to ask, why do they want to keep paying out hefty bonuses to well-compensated executives in these times of fiscal stress and economic restraint? Why is it that the opposition leaders want to keep paying senior federal officials who are under investigation for serious ethical wrongdoing? Why do they want to use taxpayer dollars to do that? It just defies logic, Mr. Speaker. The package of bills being brought to the floor this week are common sense, and they should easily garner bipartisan support. There's simply no reason for members of either party to support mega bonuses, expensive paid vacations, and zero accountability measures for Washington bureaucrats. We are here to represent the people, not the government. Working families in America want to trust their government, and they want to rebuild their faith in our economy. These bills are a much-needed step in the right direction toward accomplishing this goal. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this common-sense legislation, and I urge the Senate to join us in this effort and not waste time while these abuses continue. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Virginia yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition? Without objection, gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise to congratulate Taft Early Learning School in Uxbridge, Massachusetts for being named as a Bronze Award winner in the USDA Healthier School Challenge. This initiative recognizes those schools enrolled in Team Nutrition that have created healthier school environments through promotion of nutrition and physical activity, a program that is now part of First Lady Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign. To achieve this challenge, Taft applied for and received a salad bar grant, which enabled them to offer lots of fresh fruit and vegetable choices every day as part of lunch. They incorporated more whole grains and beans in the menu. They hired an experienced cook to make this happen and added extra physical activity every day, which required the creativity and cooperation of the classroom teachers. I want to congratulate Principal Judy Lamar, Food Service Director Janice Watt, the teachers, administrative staff, students, and parents for their hard work in improving the food, nutrition, and exercise programs at Taft Early Learning School. This is a big deal, and I'm proud of this important accomplishment. I yield back my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In May, the IRS proved to the American people it cannot be trusted to fairly enforce laws. As if intentional targeting of Americans was not troubling enough, Obamacare will give the IRS even more power in just a short month. That's right. The agency that bullied Americans for exercising their right of free speech will be the same agency involved in enforcing health care. Patients and their doctors should make the decisions that work best for them, not Washington, and much less the IRS. Allowing the IRS to enforce Obamacare opens the door to more abuse, targeting, and intimidation of Americans. That's why I join my colleagues in support of a common-sense bill, H.R. 2009, Keep the IRS Off the Health Care Act, that will stop the IRS from enforcing or implementing any part of Obamacare. It's time for our friends across the aisle to listen to the American people. Keep the IRS out of our lives and out of our health care.
Gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Memphis, Tennessee, and the United States lost a great citizen and a legend on Sunday when Lois DeBerry passed away. Lois was the Speaker Pro Tem Emeritus of the Tennessee General Assembly and the longest-serving member of the Tennessee General Assembly. I had the honor to serve with her. She was a great orator, and she was the go-to person in the Tennessee General Assembly on civil rights issues, women's issues, children's issues, education issues, and anything about Memphis. She served with distinction and was recognized all over the country. The Delta Sigma Thetas were valued to her and valued to have her as a member. She was a past president of the National Association of Black Local Elected Officials and respected in the National Conference of State Legislatures. Yesterday, a flag flew over the Capitol, which I have to present on Saturday at her funeral, the day that we celebrated the 50th March on Washington, a march in which Lois participated as a very young person. Hers was a life well lived. She'll be missed by all in Memphis and me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Request permission to address the House for 1 minute to revise and rescind the remarks.
The gentleman seek unanimous consent?
Yes.
The gentleman's recognized without objection for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to honor Cheryl Schofield of the USDA Rural Development Office in Ray, Colorado. Cheryl will retire next month as the USDA Rural Development Northeast Area Director after 30 years of dedicated service. A fourth-generation Yuma County resident, Cheryl studied at Jones Real Estate College and the University of Colorado, earning a graduate degree in public administration. After getting her start at Ray State Bank and World Savings Mortgage Company, she took a job with the Department of Housing. But it was at the USDA Rural Development Office where Cheryl spent 31 years as an outstanding and invaluable asset to her agency. Her rural background, education, and true passion for her work gave wind to Cheryl's impressive career. Outside of work, Cheryl's been an active member of her community, board member, small business development, a wealth of professional experience she's shared with communities throughout the Eastern Plains, married to her husband Delbert for 41 years. Town meetings, there's not a single community on the Eastern Plains that Cheryl's work hasn't impacted. Her legacy will live on every main street of Eastern Colorado. Thank you, Cheryl, for your service. Yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to support funding for the National Institutes of Health and to stop the mindless and automatic sequestration cuts. Earlier this month, I met with Carlos Santos and James Hodges, two young men from Florida. We talked about their sisters who suffer from cystic fibrosis and how potential budget cuts to the NIH will drastically affect their lives. Cystic fibrosis is a chronic disease with no cure. While discoveries from NIH over the past 30 years have helped double the life expectancy of those with cystic fibrosis, there is much more we can do, including finding a cure for this disease in our lifetime. Because NIH's groundbreaking research into this disease and others, I ask my colleagues to support funding for NIH. We must secure our nation's future by making smart investments in our nation's health. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently met with my good friend Linda Sint, a former colonel in the United States Air Force from Medford, Oregon. For many years, Linda has served as a member of my Service Academy Nominations Board, helping me find honorable young men and women to serve their country in our academies. This time, though, we discussed a much different issue. Last year, Linda lost her husband, U.S. Air Force Major Dwayne Sint, to pancreatic cancer. It's a terrible disease with an extremely low survival rate. We owe it to Linda and other families affected by this disease to help improve treatment and to find a cure. So last year, with the help of Linda and her fellow advocates, Congress passed and the President signed the Recalcitrant Cancer Research Act, which helps incentivize research and treatment for this horrible disease and others like it. Now, there's still much more work to be done, but we're hopeful we can continue to build upon this effort and find treatments and cures to help patients and families nationwide. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request permission to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend
Does the gentlelady seek unanimous consent? Without objection, the gentlelady from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the American people have said loud and clear that what they want the most from Congress is jobs. And what is Congress giving them? Jabs. Threats to bring the government to a halt. Threats to let the United States Treasury default. Threats to slash the funding for mass transit that brings people to their jobs. And the tentacles of sequestration will strangle growth even more. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that the sequestration will cost us 900,000 fewer jobs next year. It's time to stop playing politics with our economy and for the people, and we need to provide a strong workforce, a strong infrastructure and manufacturing sectors. We need to provide a living wage to grow the middle class and strengthen America's standing as a leader in education and pioneering research. But still, our friends on the other side of the aisle are marching to the tune of their own drum, when what they should be listening to is the cry of the American people for more jobs.
Gentlelady's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of the legislation that the House is considering this week. The people of eastern and southeastern Ohio sent me to Congress to get the government off their backs, to allow them to create jobs and to earn a living and raise a family without government overreach and interference. Over the past 2.5 years, the Republican-led House has done exactly that on a daily basis. However, some in Washington have not gotten the message. I'm proud to continue supporting legislation that stops government abuse like we've seen in the IRS, restrains a runaway federal government that doesn't seem to have any brakes, and that empowers the American people with greater opportunities to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. The people of eastern and southeastern Ohio want a strong economy that will create a more secure future for them. The House Republican plan to stop government abuse lays the groundwork for more secure jobs and a more secure future, with new jobs, more freedom, and expanded opportunities. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman from Ohio yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Nevada seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady from Nevada is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today to speak out against the misguided priorities that are driving the GOP's obstruct, repeal, and repeat agenda, and to call instead for new policy that addresses the serious challenges our nation faces. When we adjourn tomorrow, Republican leadership will leave behind a staggering record of unfinished business and partisan messaging bills that put politics ahead of the American people's priorities. Since January, Republicans have not even allowed a vote on a real jobs bill. They haven't finished a budget, passed comprehensive immigration reform, restored funding on nutrition programs, or fixed the sequester. Their aversion to meaningful action is undermining the important economic progress we've made. It's keeping 11 million undocumented immigrants in the shadows, and it's disproportionately harming low-income women and families. Hopefully, they'll see the light during the August recess and put aside the obstruct, repeal, and repeat agenda and set a new one that answers the public's outcry for action. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, Obamacare is a train wreck quickly approaching a station near you. This unworkable, unaffordable law will destroy hundreds of thousands of jobs, disrupt the doctor-patient relationship, and offer, quote, a free ticket, no show, end of quote. According to a recent CBS News poll, 54% of Americans disapprove of the health care law, while only 36% approve. It is clear the American people have lost faith in the President's government health care takeover bill. The federal government, especially the IRS, has betrayed the trust of the American people. Every day, more groups come forward and reveal unfair targeting by the IRS. House Republicans are acting to protect every American family from the abuse, targeting, and harassment of the IRS. This week we will vote on the Keep the IRS Off Your Health Care Act, legislation that bars the IRS from implementing Obamacare. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this bill and help restore the American people's faith in limiting government. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism. I am grateful to welcome the Sonny and Jay Phillips family to the Capitol.
The gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize a talented educator in my district, Andrew Walter. Mr. Walter is a math teacher at Stagg High School in Stockton, California, and he is one of 5 California finalists for the 2013 Presidential Awards for Excellence in Mathematics and Science Teachings. For the past 20 years, Mr. Walter has been enriching the lives of the youths in San Joaquin County as the chair of the mathematics department, as well as serving as a math, engineering, science, and achievement advisor for pre-engineering students. An education in STEM-related fields is critical for our students to help them survive in these competitive fields. Mr. Walter has led his Math, Engineering, Science Achievement, or MESA, team to win the state championships multiple times and the national championship last year with the wind turbine built solely by his high school students. It's this type of dedication and commitment that will lead to innovation, the creation of good-paying jobs, and keep America as a world leader in these areas. I urge my colleagues to join me in congratulating Andrew Walter, not only for his nomination, but also for everything he has done for his students.
The gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to address Attorney General Holder's misleading Congress with deceptive testimony. If I or any other ordinary citizen did what the Attorney General did, we would be thrown in jail for perjury. In front of the House Judiciary Committee on May 15th, Holder said he knew nothing of the targeting of journalist James Rosen. Yet Holder himself signed the subpoena for Mr. Rosen's records. Does the Attorney General suffer from Sergeant Schultz syndrome, where he hears nothing, sees nothing, and knows nothing? How convenient for Mr. Holder. But at what cost to our Constitution? We are a nation of laws, but the Attorney General has created an atmosphere of lawlessness in America. No one is above the law. He must be held accountable. As Supreme Court Justice Brandeis said, in a government of laws, the existence of the government will be imperiled if it fails to observe the law scrupulously. If government becomes a lawbreaker, it breeds contempt for the law. It invites every man to become a law unto himself. It invites anarchy. I ask you, has the Attorney General invited anarchy? I will continue to make my case here at the People's House, at the People's Pulpit. I will be back.
The gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is a picture of a homeless young person. 19,000 of them are in Houston, according to 28 school districts. And just think, on the floor of the House before it went thud, there was a housing bill that cut the housing appropriation for homeless and veterans and working Americans to $44.1 billion, but more importantly, under the sequestration amount offered by the Republicans. Even the Senate, in a compromised manner, put it at $54 billion. So I rise today to ask, is anyone speaking for these young people, such as those who reside in the place called Little Audrey in my district, where I sat down with young people who had lived in a crack house, not because they were on crack, but because that was the place for them to live until they found Little Audrey. Or the young lady that was abused until she found Little Audrey, or the twins who were homeless with no parents till they found Little Audrey. I'm going to ask the city of Houston to use its public facilities money that it's been blessed to have from the federal government, Housing and Urban Development, to help build a facility for Little Audrey. And I'm going to insist that when local communities get federal dollars that we fight so hard for, is to be able to use them creatively to serve people, to serve the taxpayers, to serve the homeless, to serve homeless youth. How long are we going to have to cry out for young people who suffer from mental concerns and others who have no place to live? I hope Houston will listen, and I hope my friends on the other side of the aisle will have mercy on those who need housing. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, for some of us, growing up was the best of times, simple times, safe times. But life isn't that way anymore for some kids. Today, young girls, average age between 12 and 14, are lured into a crooked, despicable business. It's sex trafficking, modern-day slavery. Girls have been threatened, raped, forced into selling their bodies on the streets by the worst deviants in our society. Some of these girls are smuggled into the United States by slave traffickers from other countries, and some are from our own neighborhoods. Sex traffickers should be put in the jailhouse forever, but society must get to the root of the problem, the demand. That's why I've introduced the End Sex Trafficking Act along with Representatives Maloney, Granger, and Nolan. Our bill targets the interstate criminals who purchase sexual acts from child victims and ensures that they too are prosecuted as human traffickers. No longer can these deviants hide. Let the long arm of the law punish the child molesting pedophiles who steal the innocence of children. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Hawaii seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady from Hawaii is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A word not much known about 2 years ago now is a household word. It is to sequester, a verb, and sequestration, a noun. Today in the Armed Services Committee, we heard the Republican chair and the Democratic ranking member state in almost unison, sequestration must end. It is a threat to our great nation's readiness posture, affects jobs, the manufacturing base. DOD alone has 800,000 civilian employees. It is not only defense that's being affected, it is all of the discretionary budget. CBO estimates it will cost about 750,000 jobs this year alone. We saw it earlier this year with the FAA. We will see how the U.S. Forest Service is affected by 500 firefighters that are lost, 50 to 70 fire engines, and 2 aircrafts. We will also see 70,000 children lose access to Head Start. What will it take to turn it off, to quote our House ranking member? We all agree it was not meant to be. It's a mistake. Mr. Speaker, let's turn it off.
The gentlelady's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the President is giving speeches on his plan for economic growth. His economic plan is to grow government, regulate more, spend more, and tax more. His speeches will not create jobs. The economy does not improve when the administration piles on tens of thousands of pages of costly new regulations. Families don't thrive when the only jobs they can find are part-time because of Obamacare's onerous mandates, forcing employers to cut back on hours in order to be able to keep their doors open. This administration's oppressive regulations cost small businesses on average $10,585 per employee. To create jobs and jumpstart the economy, we must pull back on unnecessary punitive regulations, hold the bureaucracy accountable, and shrink the size of government, and reward rather than punish success. This week we are voting to be able to stop government overreach, stand up for the American people, and give them a fighting chance to be able to succeed. To have access to fair and affordable and effective health care systems, not to have to worry about the federal government increasing burdens on their lives, abusing power, and stunning economic growth, and putting their jobs at risk. The American people need this response. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow begins a long district work period. When I arrive, the #1 question will be, Congresswoman Wilson, what are they doing in Washington to help us with unemployment and the economy? What are they doing about sequestration? I will say The Republicans have not allowed one vote on serious legislation to create jobs or jobs training programs, not one vote to rebuild our bridges and schools, not one bill to hire more teachers and police officers, and nothing to stop sequestration. Mr. Speaker, bring the American Jobs Bill to the floor. It creates jobs and stops sequestration. The Farm Bill is still up in the air. Judicial confirmations are on hold. Immigration reform is still on the radar. And Mr. Snowden is still a fugitive from justice. Still, all the polls tell us that the #1 issue for the American people is jobs and the economy. Bring the American Jobs Act to the floor. It deserves a vote. And it stops sequestration. Jobs, jobs, jobs should be the mantra of this Congress. Thank you.
The gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute and to extend the revised by 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Great Lakes are truly one of the jewels of North America. They contain 20% of the world's surface water and drinking water for 30 million people. They're also a driver of our economy, as studies have shown 1.5 million jobs are directly connected to the Great Lakes, generating $62 billion in wages. That's why I'm encouraging my colleagues to support my Great Lakes Ecological and Economic Protection Act. This bill will help ensure we have a healthy Great Lakes while boosting the economies along the Great Lakes region. This bill already enjoys bipartisan support, and I hope my colleagues will join me in protecting one of the most precious resources in North America, the Great Lakes. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, as we see Obamacare go into effect, we see that it is making affordable health insurance a reality for hardworking families. Thanks to Obamacare, 360,000 small businesses have the right to receive tax credits to help with the cost of providing coverage to their employees. Thanks to Obamacare, senior citizens have the right to affordable prescription drugs and free preventative benefits. Thanks to Obamacare, millions of young adults have the right to stay on their parents' health insurance until they're 26. And thanks to Obamacare, women have the right to no longer be denied coverage because they are sick or have pre-existing conditions. And thanks to Obamacare, women no longer have to pay higher premiums for health insurance just because we are women. We are finally making great progress in fixing an outdated health care system that has been broken for far too long. Let's not vote to take away the American people's rights.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor Sergeant Carl Moore III from Bigelow, Arkansas, for his continuing service to our country. Sergeant Moore, a fellow Screaming Eagle, is with the 101st Airborne Division. In early June of this year, Sergeant Moore was wounded while on patrol in Afghanistan. A bullet struck him under his arm, puncturing one of his lungs and grazing his spine. Sergeant Moore is currently at Tampa Polytrauma Rehabilitation Center, where he is recovering. He's unable to walk, but he has feeling in his legs and toes, and his prognosis is good. I pray for Carl's speedy recovery so he can get back to enjoying the things he loves. My thoughts go out to his parents, Carl and Teresa of Conway, Arkansas, and his wife, Heather, and their 4-year-old daughter, Addison. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to join me in thanking Sergeant Moore for his service and to saluting all who have served and continue to serve our nation. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, sadly I come before the Congress to recognize and honor a person that I love very much, Lillian Kawasaki. Lillian Kawasaki was a dedicated public servant, a respected community leader, a beloved wife and a sister, and she was a dear, dear friend of mine. Sadly, on July 18th, Lillian passed away, and a memorial service will be held this Saturday, August 3rd. Lillian was a generous soul. Her generosity of self always was done with grace and enthusiasm. She engendered tremendous respect and love from all who knew her. She possessed an infectious smile. Her laugh made everybody feel better. Her work for the last 2 decades was on environmental efforts, first with the Port of Los Angeles and then with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. It brought not only recognition to her throughout California, but also throughout the nation. She was an expert on water issues, and when she passed away, was a member of the Water Replenishment District elected. Long Beach has lost one of its finest. I and countless members in California already miss Lillian. She will not be forgotten.
The gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask to unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the bad news on Obamacare just keeps rolling in. As if it's not bad enough that the IRS will be helping run Obamacare, Maryland announced last Friday that health insurance premiums will go up 25% next year under Obamacare. Whatever happened to the President's promise that premiums would go down, not up? Just another empty promise? Maryland's middle-class families, already struggling to pay their health insurance premiums, will see their policies cost over $1,000 more next year under Obamacare. Many will just drop their insurance, and that will just increase the long lines we already see in our crowded emergency rooms. Mr. Speaker, Obamacare is a disaster. We should repeal it before it does more damage to our hard-working middle-class taxpayers and before it destroys even more jobs. I yield back the time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? Without objection, gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Last week, I joined my colleagues in a bipartisan trip to New York City to celebrate America's immigrant heritage. Together, we sailed toward the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island. We stared down those dark, cascading waterfalls at the 9/11 Memorial and remembered our ancestors at the Museum of Jewish Heritage and the African Burial Grounds. All around us were reminders of how people came to America by choice or not, sometimes not by choice, but then hoping for a better life. Our country has been the better because of it. Whether it's the laborers who built our bridges or the scientists and leaders who made their mark in history, we couldn't be where we are today without immigrants. I was reminded of that as I witnessed a naturalization ceremony. 82 people from 27 countries became new Americans that day, and you could see their beaming faces. Immigration is at our core, the moral fiber that binds us together and makes us stronger. Congress now has a responsibility to pass an immigration bill that is worthy of our rich heritage. Let's write the next chapter of American history, one that our children and our grandchildren can be proud of.
The gentlelady's time's expired. The chair lays before the House an enrolled bill.
H.R. 2611, an act to designate the headquarters building of the Coast Guard on the campus located at 2701 Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue Southeast in the District of Columbia as the Douglas A. Monroe Coast Guard headquarters building and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 322 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 49, House Resolution 322, resolved that at any time after the adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill, H.R. 367, to amend Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code to provide that major rules of the executive branch shall have no force or effect unless a joint resolution of approval is enacted into law. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. It shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary, now printed in the bill, modified by the amendment printed in Part A of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. That amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. All points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute are waived. No amendment to that amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those printed in Part B of the report of the Committee on Rules. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. Any member may demand a separate vote in the House on any amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole to the bill or to the amendment in the nature of a substitute made in order as original text. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 2. Upon the adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill H.R. 2009 to prohibit the Secretary of the Treasury from enforcing the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act and the Health Care and Education Reconciliation Act of 2010. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means, and 2, 1 motion to recommit. Section 3. House Resolution 292 is laid on the table. Section 4. On any legislative day during the period from August 3, 2013 through September 6, 2013, A. The journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved. B. The chair may at any time declare the House adjourned to meet at a date and time within the limits of Clause 4, Section 5, Article 1 of the Constitution to be announced by the chair in declaring the adjournment. And C. Bills and resolutions introduced during the period addressed by this section shall be numbered, listed in the congressional record, and when printed shall bear the date of introduction, but may be referred by the Speaker at a later time. Section 5. The Speaker may appoint members to perform the duties of the Chair for the duration of the period addressed by Section 4 of this resolution as though under Clause 8A of Rule 1. Section 6. Each day during the period addressed by Section 4 of this resolution shall not constitute a calendar day for purposes of Section 7 of the War Powers Resolution, 50 United States Code 1546. Section 7. Each day during the period addressed by Section 4 of this resolution shall not constitute a legislative day for purposes of Clause 7 of Rule 13. Section 8. Upon the adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill, H.R. 2879, to provide limitations on bonuses for federal employees during sequestration, to provide for investigative leave requirements for members of the senior executive service, to establish certain procedures for conducting in-person or telephonic interactions by executive branch employees with individuals, and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion, except 1 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, and 2, 1 motion to recommit. Section 9. Upon passage of H.R. 2879, the following bills shall be laid on the table: H.R. 1541, H.R. 2579, and H.R. 2711.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, for the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to my good friend, the gentlelady from New York, Mrs. Slaughter, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
During the consideration of this resolution, all time is yielded for the purposes of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Rules Committee met and reported a rule for consideration of H.R. 367, the REINS Act, H.R. 2009, the Keep the IRS Off Your Health Care Act, and H.R. 2879, the Stop Government Abuse Act. The rule provides a structured rule for consideration of the REINS Act, allowing debate time for 12 of 23 amendments submitted. In addition, the rule incorporates a technical correction to the bill from Chairman Sessions. The rule provides for 1 hour of debate equally divided between the chairman and ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. In addition, the rule incorporates a purely technical amendment to the bill from Chairman Sessions. Additionally, the rule provides a closed rule for consideration of H.R. 2009, the Keep the IRS Off Your Health Care Act, and provides for an hour of debate equally divided between the chairman and ranking member of the Committee on Ways and Means. Furthermore, the rule provides a closed rule for consideration of H.R. 2879, the Stop Government Abuse Act, and provides for 1 hour of debate equally divided between the chairman and ranking member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the rule provides floor management tools to be used during the August recess. Mr. Speaker, America's job creators have struggled against strong headwinds to recover. In fact, since President Obama took office, 131 new major regulations costing at least $70 billion have been added to America's regulatory system. Under current law, Congress only has the power to disapprove regulations put forward by the executive branch. H.R. 367 flips that presumption on its head. Any major regulation estimated to cost over $100 million would need to be approved by Congress and must be given an up or down vote within 70 legislative days. In his State of the Union address, President Obama said, quote, "To reduce barriers to growth and investment, when we find rules that put an unnecessary burden on businesses, we will fix them." H.R. 367 does just that and allows Congress to decide whether major rules place unnecessary burdens on job creators. The second bill covered by this rule, Mr. Speaker, would prohibit the Treasury Department, including the IRS, from implementing or enforcing any provision of Obamacare. In the last few months, the American people have learned that the IRS has targeted and intimidated Americans exercising their First Amendment rights. Given the recent scandal and the massive amount of sensitive information the IRS is required to collect under Obamacare, it's completely inappropriate for the IRS to be given this responsibility. A recent poll showed that 53% of Americans want Obamacare repealed entirely. Mr. Speaker, health care decisions should be made by a patient and his or her doctor, not Washington bureaucrats. The final bill covered by this rule, H.R. 2879, was extensively debated on the floor yesterday. In fact, it combines 3 bills, all aimed at limiting government and returning that power back to the people. This bill accomplishes 3 major objectives. First, it caps bonuses for federal employees at a maximum of 5% of their salary through the end of the fiscal year 2015. With federal officials furloughing employees due to sequestration, the government should not, at the same time, be handing out millions of dollars in bonuses to other employees. Second, this bill allows for senior federal officials under investigation for serious misconduct to be put on unpaid leave. Under current law, agencies have little recourse but to put officials on paid leave where they can collect the paycheck for months or even years while the investigation occurs. Finally, this bill allows for citizens to record their meetings and telephone exchanges with federal regulatory officials. In my home state of Oklahoma, along with 37 other states, this is already the case. However, 12 states require all parties involved in the conversation to consent to recording. This bill would allow individuals in all 50 states to record their conversations or meeting with federal officials acting in their official capacity. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 367, H.R. 2009, and H.R. 2879 all express the views of my constituents. They're increasingly concerned and opposed to an intrusive and expansive government that seeks to tell them what they can and cannot do. These bills seek to stem the tide of crushing regulation and rein in an overbearing federal bureaucracy. I urge support for the rule and the underlying bills, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for yielding me the 30 minutes and yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is the final week that the House will be in session before we begin our recess. I don't like to call it recess since we work as hard at home, but anyway, this is probably the last time we'll get together till we come back in the fall. And as the clock runs out on another legislative session, we are voting the 40th time, 40 times, to repeal or to undermine the Affordable Health Care Act. By now, we all know how today's debate will end. The majority will pass the bill, the Senate will refuse to take it up, and we will have wasted again the public's time and their patience. When they adjourn for August recess, only to return in September with issues like jobs and immigration reform and sequestration will be left unsolved as they are today. The other night I was watching comedian Stephen Colbert on his program, and he was talking about the number of times we voted to try to repeal health care. And he had a good idea for the Republicans. He said, obviously, you're not going to be able to do it if you say you're going to repeal health care. So he suggested that a bill be written that is titled, quote, "This is not another repeal of Obamacare. We swear it, but just don't look inside it, sign it." And if you put that act out, that maybe you would get somewhere with it. Some speculated the GOP is desperate to get rid of this law because they know it is working and will work in better as it gets fully implemented, and they have firmly planted their feet on the wrong side of history once again. I can't comment on their motivation, but it's clear that millions of Americans are using this law because of the incredible benefits that it provides. I was really stunned by the last speaker on the 1 minute this morning talking about Maryland, because we just got the statistics from Maryland. The health plans are better than ever, and just last week Maryland announced that their rates are going to be among the lowest in the country. Not, as he said, a 20% increase. Nevada announced a young adult will be able to purchase a catastrophic health insurance plan for less than $100. And I said last week when we had the other vote to get rid of health care that New York had just come out with a wonderful news that on the exchanges that 17 insurers had applied to provide insurance in the state of New York, and it would cause those premiums to fall by more than 50%. And we join 11 other states with the same kind of news. It's happening all over America. And for those states that decided not to do an exchange and are going to let the government do it, fine. I think they'll do okay there. Maybe we'll move closer to single payer, which is what we should be doing. Now, 62 days from now, those new exchanges will open their doors, and they are going to provide millions of Americans with secure and affordable health care. For the very first time, insurers are going to be barred from denying coverage because of a pre-existing condition, and barred from placing lifetime and yearly limits on an individual's health care, and they are sending checks back to their customers all over the country because the new law requires them to spend 80% of the premium dollar on health care. And since the far less than 80% had spent, many companies are doing rebates, and people are getting those checks. this, as I think I really can't go on much further without talking about what it is we are doing here today. I think it's somewhat historical. May not be the first time, probably not. But I've not had the pleasure before, I think, of doing a rule which really consists of 5 bills with very little in common being stuffed into one because the House basically imploded yesterday. But as we said before, and I've done all of the rules on health care repeal, and if I had a machine, I could just paste repeat and walk out of the room and do the same speech over and over again. And I asked Dr. McDermott the other day, who's a psychiatrist, what do you call someone or one group that does the same thing over and over and over again, anticipating a different result? And he gave me the psychiatric definition for that. Well, we all know that today's vote is not a single thing except another cynical attempt to score political points. And as we go to our districts this August, the question is whether or not the majority will double down on their failed agenda in September and continue their irresponsible attempts to repeal the health care law. If they do, they will be escalating their brinksmanship to a new level and risking a government shutdown simply because they don't want to compromise. Already, as you know, members of the majority are threatening to shut down the government if the Affordable Care Act is not repealed. That does show kind of an act of desperation, doesn't it? In fact, a dozen Republican senators have signed a letter vowing to vote against a continuing resolution that we have to have because nobody got their work done that funds the Affordable Care Act, and more than 60 House Republicans have called on the majority's leadership to defund the Affordable Care Act in any continuing resolution that comes before the House. Instead, I want the majority to make a change here. My fellow Kentuckian, Hal Rogers, who is the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, yesterday made it plain to everybody that this is all a hoax. He talked about sequestration and the impossibility to bring a transportation bill that scarcely has enough money to maintain what roads we have, and it imploded on the floor when nobody would vote for it. While we're out on recess, please think about this and think about what sequestration is doing in the United States. I hope you read former Senator Byron Dorgan's article in the New York Times talking about the devastation on the Indian reservations because the money that we owe them by treaty, which is being lost to sequestration. The people who are doing health research at the National Institutes of Health, where they tell me in the Human Genome Project that they are very close to finding the cure for cancer, but now they have to stop it. As a scientist, I can promise you, you do not turn research off and on like a faucet. And think of all the people who can't get their treatment because of sequestration. And think of all the people who live in this area and work for this government and keep this government working, many of them both 2 members of the family on federal payroll who have suffered as much in that family as a 40% pay cut. And the bills that are in here today, again, say to the federal employees, we don't value you for anything. We've already passed legislation in here that hurts their pensions. They haven't had a raise for 4 years. What we're saying now, if this bill passes today, is that they can be fired without cause and that their phones will be tapped by any citizen in the United States. I really am concerned about what's doing here. We talk about too much regulation, and I want to close with something I mentioned last night at the Rules Committee because I realize most Americans don't know it. Now, let me talk about under-regulation. In the food market, chickens are inspected 100 at a time, 100 a minute, going through the conveyor belt. They are covered with barnyard debris and feces and whatever else, and one person is inspecting them as 100 of them go by. So what's going to happen now? They have decided the regulator will have to do 140 chicken a minute. And recently, the Washington Post, rather, had a front-page story that stunned me to the core. They said that a young food inspector working for the government, lungs bled out and he died from the chemicals that he inhaled from his chicken inspection days. Now, after the chicken goes through the conveyor belt, it goes into a bath of cool water and Clorox, and then it's ready to be packaged and all plasticed up and have it for dinner. Is that over-regulation? For heaven's sakes, give me more regulation than that. But I want to urge my colleagues today to vote no on this rule, the underlying legislation, and quit this farce in the House of Representatives, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma.